Kara Johnson grew up in a small, peaceful town where everybody knew one another, and life seemed simple. From the very beginning, she was the kind of person people remembered. Teachers admired her focus, neighbors trusted her with their children, and friends always described her as someone who made others feel safe. She wasn't born into privilege, but she had a spirit that carried her through any challenge. Her parents often said Kara was destined for something big, and she believed it too. Education became her priority, and by the age of 22, she was in her final year of college with dreams of becoming a teacher. She imagined herself standing in front of a classroom, guiding children toward brighter futures. To her, teaching was more than a career, it was a calling. Kara spent her days balancing schoolwork, a part-time job at the local library, and volunteer work at community shelters. She had a natural ability to connect with people, whether it was calming a child during story time or listening patiently to an elderly neighbor who needed company. Her life seemed full, yet she never complained about being tired. She was motivated by the idea that hard work now would create a better future later. Her friends admired her determination and often joked that she lived several lives at once, always finding time to give something back. Despite her busy schedule, Kara still made room for small joys. She loved hiking in the woods surrounding her town, often capturing pictures of sunsets and trees on her phone. She had an old notebook where she wrote short poems about the world around her, pieces she never shared with anyone. These private words revealed a side of her that was both thoughtful and vulnerable, a young woman with hopes but also quiet fears. Kara sometimes wondered if she was too trusting, too willing to see good in people who might not deserve it. Still, she believed kindness could change the world, even in small ways. Her family was proud of the woman she was becoming. Her mother often said Kara reminded her of a candle, bright enough to light up the room, yet fragile in its glow. Friends described her as the anchor of their group, the one who always checked in when someone seemed down. Her professors believed she had the potential to shape not just classrooms but communities. Kara, however, remained humble. She focused only on what she could do today, never imagining her life would one day serve as a lesson for an entire nation. In the last months of her life, everything seemed to fall into place. She had secured an internship at a local elementary school, where she spent afternoons working with children. She would return home with stories of how a shy student finally raised their hand in class, or how a child struggling with reading finally managed a full sentence. Those moments meant more to her than grades or awards. Kara believed she was on the path to something meaningful, something lasting. She had no idea that her future was about to be cut short, that the small town she loved so much would soon become the setting of a tragedy that would echo far beyond its borders. The night Kara disappeared began like any other. It was early winter, and the air carried a sharp chill that made the streets quieter than usual. She had spent the afternoon in the college library, preparing for an upcoming exam, and later planned to stop at a gas station on her way home. Nothing about the day seemed unusual, yet every detail would later be examined under the cold light of investigation. Kara's car, a small silver sedan that friends often teased her about because it always needed repairs, was last seen parked near the corner of the gas station's lot. For hours, it sat there unnoticed, blending into the background of everyday life until someone finally realized something was wrong. When Kara didn't return home, her parents initially thought she had decided to spend the night at a friend's apartment to study. But as the hours dragged on, worry turned into dread. She always kept in touch, always sent a message if her plans changed. By midnight, the silence was unbearable. Calls went unanswered, and texts remained unread. Her family contacted the police, setting in motion a search that would grip the entire town. Patrol cars scanned the empty roads, while officers questioned workers at the gas station. Nobody remembered seeing anything unusual. The only thing left behind was her car, with the keys still in the ignition and her purse tossed onto the passenger seat, as though she had stepped away for only a moment. The following morning, the search grew larger. Volunteers combed through wooded areas nearby, and posters with Kara's smiling face appeared on every street corner. Strangers joined hands with friends and family, unwilling to accept that someone so full of life could simply vanish. Local news stations ran updates hourly, interviewing neighbors and classmates who described Kara as reliable, responsible, and unlikely to disappear on her own. Rumors spread quickly, some claiming she had run away, others suggesting darker possibilities. But those who knew her best were certain, Something had happened to her, something beyond her control. The days that followed were filled with tension. Each new lead ended in disappointment. Someone reported seeing her at a bus station, but the footage showed only a girl who looked similar. A tip claimed she had been spotted at a diner miles away, but it too proved false. The town, once a place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors trusted one another, began to feel uneasy. Parents warned their children not to walk alone, and women avoided going out after dark. Kara's disappearance was no longer just a family's heartbreak, it became a community's nightmare. Then came the first real breakthrough. Detectives reviewing surveillance footage from the gas station found something chilling. At first glance, the recording seemed ordinary, cars pulling in and out, customers paying at the counter. But as they slowed it down, one detail stood out. At exactly 8:43 p.m., Kara was seen leaving the store. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man in a dark jacket, someone unfamiliar to her family and friends. He appeared calm, almost casual, as he followed her toward the parking lot. The video cut off before showing what happened next, leaving only questions and a growing sense of fear. The man in the surveillance footage quickly became the focus of the investigation. His face was partially hidden by the hood of his jacket, but still, the detectives managed to identify him after comparing the images with past police records. His name was Michael Turner, a 34-year-old who had been in and out of trouble for years. What shocked investigators most was how often his name had surfaced in cases that never fully went anywhere. He had been reported for following women home, leaving threatening notes, and making unwanted appearances at workplaces. But time after time the complaints had been dismissed as minor or difficult to prove. Now, with Kara's disappearance, his history suddenly looked far more dangerous. As detectives dug deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. Michael had been living only a few miles away from Kara's college, and his online activity revealed an obsession with her. On social media, he had followed every account connected to her name. Investigators discovered dozens of photographs on his phone, pictures of Kara walking to class, shopping at the grocery store, and even hiking on trails she thought were private escapes. None of them had been taken with her knowledge. They painted a chilling picture of how carefully she had been watched. What looked like ordinary days in her life had been catalogued by someone studying her movements like a predator studying its prey. The most unsettling discovery was the timeline investigators pieced together. Michael had first noticed Kara nearly a year before her disappearance, during one of her volunteer shifts at the community shelter. Records showed he had visited the shelter a few times, always lingering longer when Kara was working. From there, the stalking escalated. He began appearing in places she frequented, blending in well enough that she likely never realized she was being targeted. The gas station footage wasn't a coincidence, it was the culmination of months of quiet surveillance. The failure of the system became impossible to ignore. Several women had previously filed complaints against Michael, describing incidents eerily similar to what Kara had endured in silence. He had been caught outside homes, had driven slowly past people's workplaces, and had once been detained for trespassing. Yet in each case, the charges were reduced or dismissed. Police reports showed officers often labeled the situations as misunderstandings or minor harassment. Without stricter laws, there had been little they could do to stop him. Kara's disappearance exposed just how dangerous those gaps in protection could be. As news of Michael's connection spread, the town erupted in anger and fear. Parents questioned why someone with such a history was free to roam the streets. Reporters uncovered that Michael had even been ordered to attend counseling after a prior arrest, but never followed through, and no one had enforced it. Kara's case, now gripping headlines across the state, was no longer only about finding her. It had become a mirror reflecting a broken system. For investigators, one thing was certain: Michael Turner was not just a suspicious figure, he was the key to unraveling what had happened to Kara. Every detail pointed to him, and yet they still lacked the final proof of where she was or what he had done. The trail was closing in, but the answers remained just out of reach, keeping the entire town on edge as the search for truth grew more urgent by the day. Months of uncertainty finally ended when a hiker exploring a remote woodland area stumbled upon something unusual. Hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and branches was what appeared to be clothing, partially buried by time and weather. The police were called immediately, and the site was soon sealed off with tape as investigators combed through the forest floor. What they found confirmed the community's worst fears. The remains were identified as Cara Johnson through dental records, ending any hope that she might still be alive. The discovery shook the town to its core, transforming quiet sorrow into overwhelming grief and outrage. The location of the remains was significant. The wooded area was over 30 miles from Cara's home, in a place few people ever visited. Detectives believed it was chosen deliberately to delay discovery, but nature eventually revealed the truth. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to recover every piece of evidence. Clothing fibers, strands of hair, and traces of DNA painted a grim but clear picture. The evidence connected Cara directly to Michael Turner. Inside his apartment, investigators had already uncovered disturbing items, a box of personal belongings stolen from Cara, including notes she had written for class, and even a photograph of her family taken without their knowledge. Combined with the forensic results, the case against him became undeniable. The trial that followed gripped not only Cara's town, but the entire state. Courtrooms overflowed with reporters, advocates, and grieving supporters of Cara's family. Every revelation was more chilling than the last. Prosecutors detailed how Michael had followed Cara for months, how he had learned her schedule, and how he used the smallest opportunities to insert himself into her life. Experts testified that his behavior was a textbook example of an escalating predator who could have been stopped if earlier warnings had been taken seriously. The haunting reality was that Cara was not his first target, only the first whose case had reached this tragic conclusion. The defense attempted to argue that Michael's past incidents had been exaggerated and that there was no proof he had planned Cara's death. But the jury listened closely as evidence was presented. Surveillance footage, digital records of his online searches about remote hiding places, and the disturbing photographs recovered from his phone. The weight of the truth became impossible to ignore. Witnesses from the community, including women who had previously reported Michael, took the stand to share how their own complaints were dismissed. Their testimonies revealed a trail of warnings that had been overlooked time and again. The verdict, when it came, brought a measure of justice but not peace. Michael Turner was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, yet the courtroom was filled with tears rather than relief. For Cara's family, the knowledge that she could have been protected if the system had acted sooner was a wound that would never heal. The town mourned not just the loss of a young woman, but the failure of institutions meant to keep her safe. The grim discovery in the woods had ended the search for Cara, but it marked the beginning of a new fight, one for change that her loved ones were determined to pursue. Cara's death did not fade quietly into the background of unsolved crimes and forgotten tragedies. Instead, her story ignited a wave of outrage that grew into a movement too powerful to ignore. Community members who had once felt helpless now came together with a single purpose: to demand change. Vigils were held across the state, with thousands gathering to honor her memory by candlelight. At each gathering, voices rose not just in grief but in determination, calling for stronger protections against stalking and harassment. Cara's name became a symbol of the lives put at risk when warnings go unanswered. Lawmakers could not ignore the growing pressure. Advocates pointed out how many times Michael Turner's behavior had been flagged, how many complaints had been dismissed as unimportant, and how many opportunities there had been to intervene before tragedy struck. Newspapers published investigative reports highlighting the failures of the justice system, while television broadcasts replayed Cara's story night after night. Families of other victims came forward to share their own experiences, proving Cara's case was not an isolated one, but part of a larger, deeply rooted problem. Within months, legislators introduced new bills aimed at closing the loopholes that had allowed predators like Michael Turner to slip through the cracks. The proposed laws included stricter monitoring of repeat offenders, mandatory follow-ups on stalking complaints, and harsher penalties for those who ignored restraining orders. Victim support organizations also began to receive greater funding, ensuring that people experiencing harassment would not be left alone to fight for their safety. During debates in the state capitol, Cara's name was invoked repeatedly as a reminder of why the changes were urgent. Her parents, once overwhelmed by grief, channeled their pain into advocacy. They spoke at rallies, appeared on national talk shows, and met with lawmakers face-to-face. Their message was simple but powerful: no family should have to endure what they had suffered. Every time they told Cara's story, They humanized the statistics, turning abstract numbers into the image of a young woman who had been full of hope and potential. Their persistence paid off. Less than a year after Kara's remains were found, the governor signed into law a sweeping piece of legislation unofficially known as Kara's Law. The impact was immediate. Police departments across the state were required to retrain officers on how to handle stalking complaints. Databases were updated to track repeat offenders more effectively. Victims gained easier access to protective measures, and cases that might once have been dismissed were now taken seriously. Kara's Law became a model for other states, sparking a nationwide conversation about how society views and responds to early signs of danger. Though nothing could erase the pain of losing her, Kara's family found some comfort in knowing that her story had saved lives. Her legacy extended beyond the town where she grew up, beyond the college she had dreamed of graduating from, and into the hearts of countless people who never knew her personally but were moved by her story. Kara Johnson was remembered not only as a victim of violence, but as the reason countless others would now live with stronger protections. Her life was cut short, but through the law that bore her name, her light continued to shine.